Considering that my last 3 videos included 2 long video essays, I thought I might make a short video on this anime I came across recently. If you've seen any clips of it online, this show is practically what happens when you merge Death Note with My Hero Academia but remove all of the logic behind the main character's decisions. Except I knew none of that, and I thought it was just some cheap My Hero Academia knockoff that I could just put on out of curiosity. And frankly, and completely expected, its first episode was very underwhelming because it functionally has the same stereotypical characters in any isekai or superhero fantasy anime, minus anything to make them stand out from the format. So you could consider my surprise as I was scrolling through my phone, waiting for the episode to end, that the Deku or Midoriya equivalent just completely got pushed off of a mountain by what I thought was the supporting character named Nana. Now, you're probably thinking that's a pretty dumb oversight. The title is literally called Talentless Nana, but the character who got pushed off is called Nanao, so they 100% intended to circumvent expectations with the synopsis, promotional material, and title of the show. Either way, my interest was piqued immediately after Nana removed Nanao from the class in the first episode. I've always loved stories with some psychological whodunit or Town of Salem-esque narrative. I'm sure anyone who's played a Danganronpa game could probably relate, so I decided to watch the rest of the episodes. And as a result, I fell for the trap of the captivating first episode, since the story unfortunately only got worse from there. Now, before I get too ahead of myself, I'll give you guys some minor background information on the story, so that I can explain my criticisms more clearly. The story appears quite simple. Like always, monsters suddenly appear, and people with powers appear with them. These monsters are called enemies of humanity, and those who got powers were called the talented, since the word quirk was already copyrighted. The government decided to create academies on secluded islands to train the teenagers born with talents as a sort of boot camp, with an emphasis on the word camp. Essentially, they created these islands to eliminate the talented because the government sees them as dangerous. Additionally, the whole enemies of humanity story is just a neat way for the government to hide the fact that their real target is the talented. The real history is that the talented caused wars after gaining their powers, which led to battles between those gifted with powers and those who remained quote-unquote human. After winning the war, humanity couldn't stop the appearance of talented individuals, so they established the secluded academy and rewrote history for their benefit. For our specific island and academy, the government sends in Nana, who doesn't have any talent, to eliminate her fellow students under the guise of having an ability to read minds. She manages to get away with her claim of talent by being incredibly perceptive and having strong detective skills. With that out of the way, you can likely see the direction which the story will flow. In each new episode, we have a target for Nana to remove and the psychological drama that comes with it. At least, that is what I was going to say after watching up to episode 7. You see, I started writing the script partway through the show because I had too many ideas I wanted to express pretty early on. I wrote several paragraphs and then eventually switched to bullet point notes to ensure I didn't write myself into a corner if the show took a dramatic turn, which it ended up doing. Despite my issues with the 1st through 7th episode, I don't believe it was entirely bad at fulfilling its psychological whodunit mission. Though the writing behind some twists relied on shabby logic and the characters' actions felt forced or unnatural at times, which I'll explain in more depth later in the video, there were many creative or interesting developments. If the show simply stuck to this format from episodes 8 through 13, it likely would have fulfilled its goal as a psychological story despite its flaws. However, that's not what it chose to do. As I was writing my bullet points, I soon realized that I started to lose what the story's goal was. New characters were introduced, motivations were tested, and bonds began to form among characters. Yet none of it truly felt like it tied together in such a way to present a fitting conclusion for the story. So many questions were left unanswered going into the final episode, and ultimately there was no neat bow tie to tie it all together. The last episode did not even wrap up the final arc, which caused me to read the following 2 chapters of the manga to get the missing details I needed to give the anime and you guys a fair and honest critique. So unlike how I usually review an anime series or movie, where I follow the story and point out its flaws or successes linearly, I will separate the rest of the video into segments dedicated to each main point. For your convenience, I set these segments of the video as chapters, and they go as follows: the military's involvement in Nana's mission, the psychological whodunit, and the motivations or designs of key characters. Before getting into the psychological whodunit, I believe it's essential to tackle the involvement of the military/government in Nana's missions, as it creates some of the most significant issues for the realism of the story. You would think that before entering the island as a student, Nana would be told about the talents of the people she is supposed to get rid of. We can also be certain that the government can obtain or has obtained this information, as during the final arc of the show, in the 31st chapter of the manga, the instructor who runs the government and trained Nana says that they investigated every student before they were admitted into the academy, meaning they should know their talents in advance. The only resource Nana is provided is an estimate of how much damage each student will be capable of, which serves no purpose other than coercing Nana to obey their instructions by essentially guilt-tripping her. As a result, in many episodes, Nana has to spend a significant amount of time gathering information to enact her plans, which not only hinders their success because other talented individuals consistently exist as unaccountable random variables, and because the longer it takes for her to succeed in her missions, the longer the students who oppose her have to determine her motivations. Additionally, it is a fact that Nana is incredibly young, and without the instructor to nurture her down the path he wants, Nana could easily grow against the system through her interactions with the talented individuals. At the same time, we are made to believe that the instructor nurtured Nana's genius as a detective while being her superior as he runs the military. Essentially, we are left with a system that can be both idiotic and genius whenever it is convenient for the story. We are made to believe that Nana is required to determine the abilities of the talented individuals, and the government is using her to accomplish their goals, while also allowing the government to run poorly designed strategies by withholding information that a knowledgeable organization should be able to realize is ineffective. This method of storytelling does more harm to the story rather than good, as it makes everything possible as long as the author wishes a character or organization to be dumb enough at any given moment. This issue is largely prevalent in the conclusion of Death Note because the author wrote himself into a bind by making the characters so incredibly smart that it was impossible to find a way for them to be dumb enough to make a mistake. As a result, the entirety of the anime suffers greatly from this fact and is a major contributor to the failures of the psychological whodunit and specific characters. The best way to follow this up is by delving deeper into the psychological elements of the story, particularly concerning Nana's mission to eliminate the talented students, which was the goal we established in the very first episode. Personally, I think the first episode isn't entirely bad at fulfilling the psychological whodunit aspect of the show. The twist with Nana being the villain was neat, but this only works because we aren't aware of her intentions from the start. Nana portrays herself as a kind and high-energy student in the class, which makes for the perfect surprise once we realize the evil behind her facade. Having to piece together every tiny detail and hint provided about her character throughout the episode makes the reveal so fascinating. However, once the reveal happens, that sort of suspense and surprise is lost. It's even more damaging as the main appeal provided by the first episode was the twist that occurred at the end. With the rest of the series containing Nana's internal dialogue and approach to setting up the traps, how will the show maintain the interest that was piqued in the first episode? The way I see it, to sustain itself, the story was left with one of two paths. It can either find a creative way to change the general approach to the narrative to maintain this suspense, or it can endlessly try to copy the same approach that was used with Nana with a student who is secretly evil behind their outer appearances. Most of us can agree that the first approach is arguably better for creating a sustainable story, given that the new approach is creative and engaging. Still, and unfortunately, though better than it could have been, the author sort of made a third path somewhere down the middle of these two options. And it isn't perfect, but I'll explain it as I go. Continuing from episode 2, Nana's method of determining Shibusawa's powers and removing him leans more on the first path, which is more creative and interesting. Using the disappearance of Nanao and her knowledge that Shibusawa has some type of time travel ability, Nana gets close to him and asks for him to help her to see into the past. She continuously learns the strengths and weaknesses of his talents by pushing him to look for Nanao the night before the disappearance. Eventually, the episode culminates with Nana using her knowledge that Shibusawa can't swim and that someone needs to spot him so that he can be sent back to the present to have him teleport in the past over a frozen pool of water that she covered up with dirt. In terms of creativity and the use of prior events and information brought up in the episode, how Nana dealt with Shibusawa was among the best in the show. The large issue is that it is held together by shabby logic, as if the pathing of the episode was written in one stroke of the pen without looking back to patch any holes that might have appeared. Through Nana and Shibusawa's conversations and his ability to look into the past, there is no way that Shibusawa should have trusted her in any capacity. Even when he figures out that she was the last person with Nanao, he says that he doesn't suspect her and goes back to the past to see what happened. Further, Nana manages to avoid having her crime revealed by simply hoping that Shibusawa would get spotted by her past self in order for him to be sent back to the present, which is pretty convenient if I'm being honest. Given she didn't know about Shibusawa's talent at the time, why would she go through with pushing off Nanao if she thought someone was in the bushes? What's even worse is that even after not getting to see the full course of events, he considers Nana not guilty simply because she and Nanao seemed close. Lastly, when she calls him in the middle of the night for the culmination of her eventual plan, her strategy is to tell him that Nanao was actually attacked the day before by the enemies of humanity, and she wasn't sure if she could trust Shibusawa until the very end of the day. Any normal human, after everything that happened, would call bull on that within an instant, especially since she knew that he only gets more exhausted the further he tries to go back, and she waited till the middle of the night on the next day. In retrospect, his abilities should allow him to leave messages for himself in the past, so that he doesn't have to worry about being exhausted. If he imparts a message to his past self with a date and time, then the entirety of the whole episode is made useless, as he wouldn't have to run reconnaissance with his ability, because his past self could do it and rewrite the present, even though the concept was cool and creative. That doesn't excuse how poorly the plan and Shibusawa's talents were executed. Unfortunately, from this point forward, the story takes a large turn for the worse for the psychological whodunit. The third episode covers her attempts to remove the main antagonist to Nana's plans, or in other words, the hero of the story. The episode is still more on the creative side, but the logic behind Nana's plans is simply bad, as it lacks any sort of secrecy. I will majorly skip the episode as the hero, Onodera, is practically immortal and untouchable for the rest of the story. She figures this out by trying to turn him and an entire building into a firework, which I have no idea how that would help her mission, as it only helps to drive the students more on edge, and she has only gotten rid of 2 students so far. Having everyone more reluctant to trust others or afraid to come to class makes it harder for her to get away with things without there being a witness. I feel like there are many signs for Onodera to determine that Nana is the culprit, especially since he seems to be a pretty talented detective, but this will be largely an issue I will cover in the motivations or designs of key characters section of the video, because it never happens over the course of the whole show. The rest of the psychological whodunit from this point forward either follows the same approach as in episode 1 with Nana, except far worse, or is rushed. Many of the students she attempts to get close to or approach turn out to secretly be evil in some capacity. Additionally, like I mentioned in an earlier section of the video, Nana's lack of knowledge of the students' talents becomes a detriment to her mission. The 2 students whom Nana removes following Shibusawa both figure out that Nana is the culprit, some sooner than the events that transpired with Shibusawa, but tell nobody about it. They don't even tell Onodera, who largely becomes the detective of the class and is a person who is not discriminatory when it comes to any potential clues or hints. Additionally, one of the students turns out to be a necromancer, who determines that the island is filled with the bodies of past students and teachers, but decides to use them as summons to attack Nana, rather than questioning why they were there or telling other students about it. Eventually, both of the students who determined Nana was the culprit were removed in the simplest and least creative way, which was with poison. Actually, they are not the only ones, as following the events that transpire with these 2 insane students, Nana attacks and defeats 2 more students using poison. What's even worse is that these attacks are largely rushed and are covered by incredibly horrible plot convenience. The first of the 2, Habu, was simply attacked and then scattered among the bodies brought up by the necromancer. Nana then asks one of the students with flame abilities to burn all the bodies as a sort of way to bring peace to the souls of the students. Any regular person, especially Onodera, who is present, would question this because it's the most blatant way to hide evidence, and yet almost everyone agrees to it. What's even weirder about this is that Onodera came to the Island Academy to look for his lost sister, but does not even bother to look closer at the students to determine if one of them might be his sister. If he had, he would have found one of his fellow classmates and completely discovered Nana's plan. But the story won't allow for that, because Nana has heavy plot armor. The second of the 2, Takanashi, was tricked by Nana by impersonating Habu and sending a message through her phone that she returned Takanashi's contact lenses to her room. Takanashi can teleport, so she immediately appears in her room and was instantly poisoned when she put on her contact lenses. Nana, of course, wanted an alibi, which meant she couldn't send the text while talking with somebody else and dealing with the bodies with the other students. Thus, she set up a contraption where one of the bodies of the students would activate the send button on Habu's phone after coming in contact with the sunlight, because all of the necromancer's summons dissolve in the sunlight. Once more, this strategy feels incredibly odd and convenient, as too many factors could make it not work properly. Additionally, if the plan failed, Takanashi would end up finding the contact lenses in her room before Nana could even enact her plan, causing her to lose her alibi and potentially be at risk of being caught. The last student removal of the story appears later in the show during a student-on-student attack that Nana was not involved in. For whatever reason, Onodera is largely the person involved with determining the issues of this case, as it is heavily sidelined for some of the most random character development with regards to Nana. Eventually, the villain of the student attack is determined to be Tsurumigawa, who, for whatever reason, has this psychotic fascination with offing animals and subsequently humans if he sees them as something beautiful. He is probably one of the weirdest of the students, and he is eventually caught by Nana and Onodera. If you read the next chapter in the manga to finish the arc, he manages to escape and is then taken out by a past student of the school named Tachibana, whom I will explain in more detail in a later section of the video. Funnily enough, when Tachibana first appears in the story, Nana also tries to remove him with poison. The simplification of the story to, oh, someone needs to disappear, I'll just use poison, makes every episode unenjoyable as it feels oversimplified and easy. Furthermore, every character acting against their own and the rest of the students' best interest, while also being simplified to an insane or mad villain in some cases, without much of a motivation, feels incredibly unrealistic and uninteresting. Additionally, another issue I haven't mentioned but is also as bad as the poison is how much the story relies on the students believing in Nana's mind-reading abilities. I kid you not, there will be times where her plan will simply go wrong and she would say something like, oh my gosh, I hear the soul of this person and they are telling me that this is the truth and we need to do such and such. It has the exact same credibility as, there's a voice in my head, so you are wrong. And everyone in the room is just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. She says she can use her abilities to hear the enemies, hear those who are no longer living, and when something happens and people question why she couldn't hear the enemy, she gives the lamest excuses. There's literally a scene where someone who is doubting her asks Nana to read her mind, and she says she can't hear her thoughts since it's drowned out by everyone else's thoughts. Everyone accepts this, but it literally carries major complications for a ton of the arcs in the show and is easily brushed aside. Besides the point, many of the twists and character abilities have so much potential but fall short because the author must suspend logic and limit the potential of characters for plot convenience. Instead of structuring the story and characters to act like normal humans and not act illogically, the author strings ideas and twists together without caring about the plot holes that are caused in the process. As a result, the psychological whodunit becomes more of a psychological try not to rip my hair out as you watch the story incoherently wrap everything together in one big mess. Now that we have gone over the psychological whodunit aspect of the show, I would like to specifically focus on the motivations or designs of key characters in the show. I think the best way to do this would be to draw parallels to the Danganronpa show in games, as I believe they are really good examples of how to do it correctly. Similar to the Talented Students, the Danganronpa series has ultimates. It is a title given to students who exhibit an insane level of ability in certain specialties. For the most part, they are relatively tame, like Ultimate Affluent Progeny, Baseball Star, and Cook. But there are also more extreme or irregular ones like Ultimate Luck or being able to sense ghosts, which would lean more on the supernatural side like in Talentless Nana. Despite having these abilities, the students don't necessarily all become horrible people. In the larger society, many of them are the ones that stand out and are considered odd, because there are very few of them. Yes, there are ultimates that are worshipped or seen in a kind light, but that also doesn't necessarily feed their ego or make them bad people. As a result, when the villain of the game tries to force them to act against each other to escape, there are few who are truly evil enough to go through with it. And even many of those who do go through with it and are evil turn out to have compelling reasons and emotions that make you understand their character better. Furthermore, there comes a point in the story where the characters are so filled with grief that they attempt to rebel against the system and not hurt anyone else. But the villain uses their weaknesses, like their family and friends, to blackmail them into acting against their best interests. This is how a good psychological whodunit is made, because it provides a compelling reason for everyone's motivations and doesn't simply villainize the characters purely on the basis of their actions or respective talents. We get to see each character's humanity and the flaws that come with it. As for Talentless Nana, the opposite is done. When Nana ends up being discovered by a character named Tachibana, who was the last surviving student of his class years before, he tells her that the talented become egotistical and gain a superiority complex because of their talents. He says they are worshipped by society while growing up and never held accountable for their actions, which causes them to grow into spoiled brats without any true moral compass. His proof for this is that his class started taking each other out of their own accord. There was no Nana to spur things into chaos, and the reason behind each attack were selfish and immature at best. This seems to be the founding logic of the series, and why so many of the students turn out to be insane, psychotic, or narcissistic at times. We are made to believe this while also knowing that Inukai, another student in the class, was made fun of and laughed at growing up because other students found her ability gross. It is through Inukai's backstory that we learn that similar to how students growing up with special abilities might be worshipped, they are also easily bullied for being different. This is something you would see in any school and is simply an unfortunate aspect of children who are still growing up. They will spot differences, point them out, and in the worst cases, ridicule each other for those differences. What Talentless Nana tries to do is play opposing ideologies in the same story and act like it makes sense. At one point, we are supposed to suspend the humanity of the characters and assume they are all villains, while also trying to see their humanity and why they are kind. This contradiction could simply be viewed as an opinion or conclusion drawn up by Tachibana and Tachibana alone, but then how do we explain the choice of character design for many of the current students, or explain Tachibana's backstory? The truth is, we can't. And that's because the author wrote this conflict into the story, and likely didn't realize how badly it suspends the humanity of many characters. This horribly destroys the realism of the story, and makes the motivations of the characters feel more akin to character bad, so character does bad things, or talented bad, so talented must do bad things. These characters needed more nuance, and unfortunately, because of the direction the author wanted to take the story, with how the government sees the talented as the enemy of humanity, it becomes lost and impossible. Now I would like to redirect to specific characters and focus on how their ideologies or designs do more harm to the story than good, and in some cases relate to my prior argument on motivations. First, I'll start with Tachibana, as most of his issues follow from what I mentioned earlier when listing out his ideologies. From what I could understand in his backstory, he appears to be the only one to have survived the war that broke out in his class. He escaped and then left the island, only to learn that he was already reported as missing, and society seemed to prefer it that way. He says that he wasn't sure if he could live with himself if he turned his back on everything on the island, so he returned. Now this is fine and dandy, but if this is all true, why did he allow many of the students to be taken out by Nana? Additionally, why in multiple other scenes and the final arc of the show does he seem to be trying to pull out Nana's humanity and have her second guess the mission she was sent to the island with? His character makes absolutely no sense to the story, because on one hand, he seems to want to learn about the facade that is the island and who runs it, while also allowing it to continue without any setbacks. Considering his talent allows him to copy any other student's talent, he could have easily prevented many of the attacks from taking place. The only out I can see to his logic is that he, similar to me, thought about the time jumping strategy that I made earlier with Shibusawa. He could, theoretically, go back in time to make everything not happen, but if that were the plan, I feel like he would no longer need to watch Nana's strategy to figure out information about the island. Either way, his true intentions and purpose in the story don't make much sense, and I'm sure that was the author's intention to keep them a mystery. However, in the worst case scenario, he acts as a complete contradiction and adds more questions to why certain events prior to episode 9 even had to happen. Falling off from what I mentioned about Tachibana, trying to pull out Nana's humanity, her self-discovery arc feels incredibly forced and uncharacterly. Throughout several episodes, Nana begins to question her purpose in the face of Inukai. Though I believe this to be a correct approach in a sense, to have a foil character test Nana's beliefs so that she can see that not every talented is evil, the approach feels too convenient and confusing. Inukai, for lack of a better word, is incredibly dense. Despite having multiple signs that would easily tell her that Nana is the culprit, and very obvious signs like seeing a photo of Nana pushing Nanao off the cliff, she still believes Nana is a good person and accepts every lie that is fed to her. Additionally, Inukai's talent allows her to heal people at the exchange of her own life, which is a pretty solid way to put into question why someone like Inukai, who is supposed to be evil, would use her ability. Through this conundrum, we are made to believe that Nana questions all of her prior beliefs, when she literally asks herself, why do I feel this way about Inukai? And tries to become friends with her and save her in the final episodes. Now, I think that this is not entirely bad, but the issue is that it is inserted smack dab into the middle of the arc where there was a student-on-student attack that Nana did not orchestrate. Furthermore, Nana pretty quickly dumps her entire tragic past on Inukai, and the story starts to feel like a tiny slice of life anime where the two of them become friends and take care of each other. And remember, this is all happening while Onodera, and in some cases, Nana, are trying to discover who attacked the other student. It feels very out of place and doesn't make much sense narratively. Lastly, I guess, and more of a personal question or issue of mine, is why does Nana act like she has never experienced life as a normal child when she literally grew up with family before being taken up by the military? She was still young and didn't get along with many kids growing up, but the story makes it sound like she's like Ayano Koji from Classroom of the Elite and grew up separated from society, which is not true. The final character I'm going to mention is Onodera, and I'll make it pretty brief, as he really is such a simple and odd character. Essentially, Onodera is a sort of Gary Stu who is capable of doing literally anything if the story requires it of him. He is immortal because of his healing abilities. He is like a detective throughout the story with a pretty high level of intelligence. He literally runs autopsies on other characters after Nana takes them out. He loves collecting knowledge and has a list of books and video games in his room. The only real fault with his character is that he doesn't really understand social norms and is a pretty quirky character because of it. Also, he suffers from the same logical issues as Nana, since if her strategies are horrible, then him not being able to determine it as the antagonist to her mission makes him just as illogical. This is probably the part that makes watching the show the most annoying, because I wish he had been able to piece it all together, but unfortunately, Nana and the story have plot armor. Anyways, that's all I got for you today, and if you made it all this way, then I really appreciate it. This video took a lot of time to put together, so I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like, leave a comment, or subscribe. Overall, I think Talentless Nana has some creative ideas and had potential for the story, but the execution was completely off, leaving much to be desired from many of the arcs, especially the final arc, which was left incomplete. For this reason, I gave the show a rating of 4 out of 10 because for what it tried to achieve and how I believe it failed. I feel like it would only be fair to sit it right below average. On a side note, and kind of annoying, the show is rated a 7.12 rating on Mal, and the first season of Danganronpa has 7.20. I understand that the first season of Danganronpa wasn't that good, but there's no shot that the show is even measurably close to the same in quality. Although I did watch Danganronpa a couple of years ago before picking up the game, so let me know if I'm completely biased in the comments below. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Here's a link to one of my other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.